Welcome to Free Speech TV. My name is Carl Nagin. I'm here with Brock Dolman, who is with the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center at Bioneers Conference. This is a conference that we've been broadcasting and talking with speakers who've appeared here. And I just want to note that this year's conference has happened in the shadow of one of the most destructive wildfires in California history. Just to give some context for you here, the fire burned through about 250,000 acres. That's 400 square miles. Forced the evacuation of over 100,000 people. Something like 8,500 structures were destroyed. That would be both homes and businesses. At least 42 people died, with dozens of people still unaccounted for. It was very much part of, in the minds of many of the people who have spoken here, including Brock. And in fact, Bioneers decided to set up a tent where people who had been affected by the fire, which is neighboring here, and in fact, before the conference started, the Marin Center was a rescue point for people to come to. And Brock's going to tell us a little bit about some of the impacts of the fire and what folks from Bioneers and you and other nonprofits in the area are going to do. So welcome to Free Speech TV, and thanks for talking to us, Brock.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm honored to be here. I wish we were here talking about another subject, but I'm happy to be here just on behalf of trying to find and value and recognize the Bioneers for really using this annual gathering in this venue. This is my 24th year in a row coming.
Wow, you're a veteran.
That regard, yeah, right. And to make space to acknowledge and value this convening of people coming together, as you said, in the context of the fact that very close to here, just 30 miles north or so, these massive fires happened all through Napa County, Sonoma County, Mendocino County, parts of Lake County. So it was a number of fires in a complex of different conflagrations and different sizes,
different communities. Not just the people. The way it's been reported in the press is, the wine vineyards. Well, that's only a small piece of this.
Yeah.
Entire sections of Santa Rosa were burned.
Yeah. So for instance, up in Mendocino County, what they call the Redwood Valley fire that burned part of Potter Valley, that fire burned almost half of the housing within the entire valley of the Redwood Valley, which is a very rural community. A number of indigenous Pomo peoples were deeply affected. A number of the organic farms, the wineries, the rangeland communities were deeply affected, a really tight-knit community there. Obviously in Napa County, there's the rural residential folks, there's high-value vineyards and such there. Sonoma County was probably the county most affected in the context of not just they call the wildland-urban interface, the WUI, in the technical terms, the fire people, the wildland-urban interface of the rural residential and the wildland spaces, the forests, the rangelands, the woodlands, that kind of stuff, people's vineyards. But also it literally came into the city. And this one fire, the Tubbs fire, that was the big one that started it off when things really got going sometime in 9:30 p.m. There was incredible, what they call the Diablo winds here, which are dry winds that come from the east, very low humidity. People know them as the Santa Ana winds in Southern California. Our version in North California is the Diablos. And there was 60, 70, up to 76 mile an hour gusts that came, and apparently that ignited that they're still trying to find out the source of the initial ignitions. And that fire started by Calistoga, came up the ridge from Calistoga down a watershed called Mark West Watershed. Some people said it was flowing like liquid lava down, almost like water coming down the canyon, burning everything in its path, and then just spilled out as it jumped over Highway 101 and basically landed in this community called Coffey Park, which many people may have seen some of the horrific footage in that neighborhood that was just blocks and blocks and blocks of homes. It took 4 hours to go 12 miles. This fire was just moving. It was just 3 miles an hour, just everything in its path. And then similar fires were acting like that around Glen Ellen and Kenwood and the city of Sonoma and on the ridge and above Napa. And so it was just amazing how quick this happened. The fact that it was at night, people were sleeping, so it was amazing. The trauma and the rapidity and the intensity and the ferocity of it is pretty unprecedented. Yeah. And then obviously the next week of just the people coming to fight the fires and try to put them out, and the amount of smoke and the evacuations of people who've lost homes or couldn't be there for smoke was let's just say it's deeply traumatized a lot of people. And
let me ask
yeah.
you, interrupt a little bit here, and just focus a little bit about what went on in the tent here at Bioneers. What were you dealing with, and what sort of plan of action are you thinking about?
So with a number of us planning to come to Bioneers, the folks with the Bioneers organization connected with us, and myself with the Occidental Ecology Center, with Trayton Heckman from Daily Acts, with Aaron Axelrod with Lift Economy. We all got on a conference call a couple of days ago and said, hey, Brad and I setting up a dome here, and let's take advantage of that space. And we eventually decided that for the 3 days of the conference, every day from 4:30 to 6, we would be co-hosting a convening in the tent, and basically it was a space for community to come together, to have a moment of silence, a moment to be with each other, a moment to acknowledge the fact that there were people in the room who had lost their homes. So everyone's got a different level of trauma, that we have trauma healers with us and body workers that were there. And then we would share out stories and breakouts and connect, and then eventually what the pattern formed up is the last 2 days, and this afternoon again, we'll do it for the third day in a row. We created subject area breakouts, if you will, on kind of broad topics, such as what's the current state within each county about the consideration for watershed restoration, for instance, or a regenerative economy, or the idea of a resilient rebuild. How are we going to rebuild in a way that's resilient, that's fire resilient, that's also in the Bioneering fashion will protect water quality and is natural building and is less toxic, and critically is the intersection of social justice and equity, and that we don't allow parts of society to take advantage of this disaster and result in a gentrification and a loss of access for many members of our community, considering housing crisis was already an epidemic in our parts of the North Bay and the Bay Area in general. So I think we've been really working hard with our Latino organizers and our union organizing communities and Jobs of Justice and North Bay Organizing Project and the undocumented communities. A number of funds have been created. One's called UndocuFund right now that's specifically raising money for undocumented folks. We at the Occidental Ecology Center hosted a number of undocumented families at our place. And
wonderful.
So, you know, I think what was amazing is the community really showed up. So at Bioneers, both of the past 2 days, we've had 150, 200 people show up.
Wow.
Sonoma County for the most part, but again, Napa and Mendocino Lake County folks have showed up. And we give some context, talk a little bit about what's happening, the governmental response, the interagency response. A series of us met with a group last week that's currently, for Sonoma County, is being managed by what's called our Agriculture and Open Space District. It's a county entity with the Board of Supervisors. The Regional Water Board is there, CAL FIRE is there, the organization called Cal Recycle, which is the state entity that's tasked with cleaning up these sites where the homes have burned.
Which are very toxic, as I understand.
So that's really what showed up for everybody right now. We had a little bit of rain the other day, but winter's coming, and you have places where homes have burned, and so you've got all of what was in a home with all the metal, all the plastic, all of the materials. So these are very toxic sites, and they're big ash piles now, and when it starts raining, that rain is going to mobilize that toxic ash. It's going to run off and possibly get into storm drains and get into streams. And most of the watersheds where this fire happened are all drained to critical creeks and rivers like the Russian River and Sonoma Creek and Napa Creek that are the home to endangered salmon, the coho salmon, the Chinook salmon, the steelhead trout, who are all going to be returning from the ocean in a month or two, all big and fat to breed. So we've got to keep the toxic ash out of the creeks, and so containment of those areas, cleanup of those areas, which is a hazmat project. There need to be professionals to show up on this project. We have to implement these tactics really quickly. So everyone's clear that that's
a priority.
Crisis mitigation number one.
Okay, the watershed. The watershed. So as you work with these state agencies and local agencies, how do you feel about their capacity to address the problem? Because it sounds like you've got a lot of nonprofits here and a lot of citizens who really want to do work, but what kind of support and what capacity do these agencies have to address these? Just the watershed problem.
Exactly.
We'll deal with the real estate problem and everything else.
Well, thankfully, Governor Jerry Brown did visit the area this past week and has declared a state of emergency, which then allows for federal state response and liberating some money, and has tasked the various agencies such as CAL FIRE, who's been on the
Right.
putting it out and mopping it up and doing the assessment of where it is, and then Cal Recycle, who's supposed to clean that up. We've had a number of our legislative folks show up from the California
Counties.
legislature, actually the Senate and the Assembly, and our federal legislators. Actually, Jared Huffman, for instance, who's back in DC, showed up. So I think there's been that piece of it. And then, yeah, like the city of Santa Rosa's, its city council's got a deal. The city of Sonoma's going to have to deal. The county of Sonoma, the county of Napa, the county of Mendocino, their boards of supervisors, their various agencies. So at this point, at least those discussions are happening, the interagency discussions with the NGOs, the nonprofits, the community organizations, our local resource conservation districts. Everybody's been getting together and talking, and I just actually got an email yesterday that the Board of Supervisors in Sonoma County is doing basically like emergency ordinances, if you will, to say it's okay if people are sleeping in the streets in their RV, or you can park a trailer here, or they're going to adjust the permitting process to facilitate that. So the communities are acting quickly in the moment, and it's kind of that dance, or doing triage of both, let's put the fires out, let's make sure people are safe, let's then identify the extent of the damage, the rural-urban damage, where is it, the intensity, come up with a plan to mitigate it, and also take care of those folks that are displaced and not the ones that just have lost homes, but also the impact of the economy and lost jobs and housing issues. So
it's a whole complex.
It's a whole complex
It's a
of
system of-
response. It's dynamic. It's ever evolving.
Right.
We're all
Now,
trying to
your
play nice together.
organization- That's good.
That's
That's
and
good.
it's a dynamic dance.
It's brought out the best in people so far. So your organization is helped by, you were telling me before a little bit about the undocumented people, and where do they go?
Yeah.
The vineyards. And
Yeah.
food.
So
What have you done? What is your organization
Well,
done?
I was going to say, so at the Occidental Ecology Center, we happen to be a retreat center in Western Sonoma County, and so we already have facilities and kitchen and housing and that kind of stuff. So we were able to, we canceled some of the programs that were going to be there anyway, and we freed up all the lodging and the housing that we had, and we were hosting a number of families and children and communities that were predominantly undocumented folks. And we spent a week with these amazing people, and then we had dinner at night, and the kids were playing and helping with dishes, and we were singing, Oaxaca and ranchero songs together, and it was I was saying earlier on Friday that there's something about this multicultural collaboration where we just are with each other as human beings, and through adversity we realize the strength in diversity, and that connectivity, that diversity is stronger through the connectivity, and adversity is a unifying, bringing together moment. And the big question for all of us is just, how do we continue to show up? Because in the weeks, months, and years for communities of rebuilding, how do we do that in a good way? How do we do it in a socially just and equitable and accessible manner that honors the diversity of the community and rebuilds in a way that, rebuild for people, rebuild for the economy, rebuild for the watershed, rebuild for resilience, and host that as a collaborative and convivial community conversation.
Terrific. Could you talk a little bit about the impact on another community, which is the First People, Native Americans in these counties? That's a large population of people who've been affected. So have you had any interaction with those people, and what's their stories?
So
what have you learned?
We work a lot with a number of the native tribes in this area, and many of the burned areas are within the tribal homelands, the tribal sovereign territories of Pomo people, Miwok people, Wapo people, Winton peoples in the various counties. A number of indigenous communities, like I mentioned earlier, in Redwood Valley, for instance. Over in Clear Lake, I know some of the Pomo folks over there, their homes and area were dramatically affected. The Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, which is the federally recognized tribe of Marin County here in southern Sonoma County. Their tribal chairman, Greg Saris, a few days ago, they just announced that they're going to be offering $1 million up to a relief fund. I don't know what the intention of how that gets spent out, but they're ponying up with $1 million on this through their capacity. And so, I think it's how the communities are gathering together is on behalf of the indigenous people of this place, of the other diversity of community members here, from the vineyard workers and the undocumented folks to the residents who've been living here for a long time and the folks who just recently moved to wine country, if you will, and so everybody's in the mix.
Do you have any sense of the numbers of people that have been displaced by this? Is there any
I mean, I
assessment
hear
of
those
that?
numbers on there's 30,000, 50,000, 100,000. I literally just was mentioning that the sheriff's office had an alert system called Nixle that we all signed up for, and we would get a text. And before we started, I was telling you just 5 minutes before, I got a series of texts from the sheriff's office saying limited access back in Larkfield, Wickiup, or parts of eastern Sonoma. And so for this whole, it's almost been 10 days, a week now, it's just been a constant barrage of texts from the sheriff's office. First it was saying advisory evacuation, mandatory evacuation, you need to leave now. Now we're limited returns, and so I don't, the numbers of people affected and who's
changing every
has
day.
Been really dynamic,
Yeah.
and now folks are being able to come back. But to the degree that there's 6,000, 7,000 homes within the broader complex of houses that are totally burned to the ground in ash, where those folks go, either did the people own the home before, or like one man who stayed with us at OAC had been renting a house in Coffey Park neighborhood for 11 years. He's going to the JC, he was a student, he was doing landscaping, and he's got no family up here, and he lost 100% of everything, including the rental and all of his everything. And so where is he going right now? So
This is very difficult.
there's a lot of community discussion and support and people trying to come together to figure that out. As I said before, in an area like the Bay Area in Northern California here, that was already at a breaking point with lack of housing and affordable housing. So it feels really untenable right now, and I wish I had a sense of that everything was going to be
there's
okay.
no way to say how long it will take this area to recover from this, but this is long. This is years.
It's going to be years. Yeah, some of those neighborhoods like the Coffey Park neighborhood, and up the hill up there towards Fountain Grove and those areas, they're completely burned out. If
And
people
the people
have seen the images, they're on the news.
And the people who are displaced, they don't really have much. I mean, if you're a home renter or an apartment renter in a place like that, you don't have any say in how the county or the real estate folks are going to do with your former home.
Exactly, you don't. And so right now I know that everybody's going to FEMA, who had a home, and getting their paperwork in order with FEMA, and obviously getting their paperwork with the insurance to the degree that homeowners had that, or renters insurance maybe, and trying to figure out how they're going to leverage these immediate funds. As far as what rebuild funds, I don't know. And so the community is, those of us who are wanting to be part of and support and facilitate that. Here's a moment in time. I think there's a collective recognition of let's try to come together and rebuild smarter and better and more inclusively. And so how do we begin those conversations? And is it that we need to come together and create a multi-day integrated design charrette and have the community come and let's analyze the places that burned in the urban areas and the rural areas, and what does smart rebuild look like? What does regenerative rebuild looks like? What does a non-toxic home look like? Because right now everybody's really clear that those ash piles where that home were are incredible toxic sites full of heavy metals and plastics and chemistry that we don't even know about because it all burned up and melted and created new compounds. And it requires
Long-term
professionals
effects.
with full suits on and respirators and gear. The regional board, water board, the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, is basically going to block off all the storm drain inlets and create these containment structures, so when it starts to rain, any of that ash is going to have to be sucked up with pumper trucks and hauled away to wastewater treatment plants while they're mopping up or picking up the solids to take those to hazardous dumps. And so what would it look like to rebuild homes in the future that either are more fire resilient when fire comes through design and materials, natural materials? We have codes for rammed earth buildings, earthen buildings, cob structures, straw bale structures with really good plasters, less flammable buildings that are natural buildings that create green jobs and support an industry and are regenerative for the land and the people, and in the event of fire, at least maybe don't don't become toxic, hazardous waste sites. So, what does that look like? How do we
So this
think
is
about
an
that?
opportunity really to think a whole bunch of systems that are affected by these kinds of disasters, which may, when we have enough time to step back and think about, well, how did this happen? Is this climate change? What is it? What could we have done? Land management, watershed management to prevent such events from happening again. Is there much thought being given to that as well?
Well, and one thing in that was a very important piece is that a gentleman, a friend of ours, a man named Ed Willie, who is a Pomo man and from Santa Rosa area, traditionally his homeland there, and he brought to our consciousness, the community gathered yesterday here at Bioneers at the Dome, about the fact that where this Tubbs fire is and the fact that it burned down this Mark West watershed through an area of North Santa Rosa and Larkfield Wickiup, if people know that, and it's the fire that then jumped 101 and took this community out called Coffee Park, that in their traditional story of the Pomo people for thousands of years, 10,000 years of occupation, that area, and I collect a plant called dogbane, which is a plant that is cut for its fiber, and it's called Indian hemp, and it's the most important fiber. And that area down in the flats is part of what was their traditional gathering grounds for this plant called dogbane for thousands of years. And that plant is regenerated with the use of fire, like the native folks, you would do tending of the wild and do pyro-intensive gardening, if you will. And the way that fire behaves in that area was a expression that has been happening in that area for thousands of years, and they knew that, and they've worked with it to cultivate a plant that was the base of their fiber. And so he was basically just letting us know that they're not so surprised this happened. And in fact, recent fire maps were showing that this same Tubbs fire footprint in 1964 burned in the same exact way, and they just overlaid this fire. And so there's a landscape, there's an intelligence, if you will, or an expression of how this landscape at this time of year with those winds and the topography has shown itself to behave this way with fire for thousands of years, and the indigenous people actually worked with that pattern, and it's now burned in 64. And so how do we also acknowledge that traditional indigenous wisdom of landscape level, multi-generational understanding, and rethink how we're going to rebuild, because there's obviously a set of conditions here that have shown themselves.
We should let our viewers know that the Tubbs fire was the most destructive fire in the history of California.
Yeah. So it's
there is something we need to learn from our indigenous.
How do we find the humility to really just look back and get centered and find a way with humility and integrity and inclusivity to move forward and do it in a good way?
You mentioned that you and your wife, you do trauma work with some of the people who've been affected by this.
My partner, Carrie Brady, does somatic experiencing, trauma-based neurobiology work, inspired up by the work of Peter Levine. And what was amazing in Sonoma County especially, which is what I got to experience, is we're blessed with so many healers, and so a number of folks brought healing centers together in the Red Cross evacuation center, say at the fairgrounds or in Forestville, and immediately there was 30 massage tables there, and there were body workers and acupuncturists and osteopaths and chiropractors and people doing just trauma and emotional healing, and the firefighters were. There was one spot in West County where after 24-hour full shifts they showed up, and they were getting body work, and they were getting massage, or they were getting an acupuncture treatment, and they all were commenting that they've never been treated like this, with so much love and so much care, and just people showed up, and food volunteers and
wow.
Anytime you listen to the news, the mayor of the city of Napa or in Santa Rosa or the Board of Soups kept saying, "Thank you for the donations. We can't take any more food. We can't take any more clothing. You guys are so generous. Send money." And thankfully there are a number of amazing recovery funds, and one resource to direct people to is called sonoma.recovers.org, and that's a community-sourced web portal right now where people are offering up resources and using resources, and there's a way to move money. There's this UndocuFund.
Are there any other resources that our viewers can look to connect with?
I know on the Bioneers website, they've put a list of some of those resources that we congealed. At dailyacts.org, they've been compiling a list of some of the resources, some of the recovery funds for folks. I know that the Biodynamic Association is supporting the vineyards up in the Redwood Valley area, and there's a fund for Pomo folks in Clear Lake, and then there's the various community foundations in Mendocino and Sonoma have larger funds, and I think Facebook already put $250,000 into a community foundation in Sonoma County. So different folks are going to support different funds depending on the target constituency of the fund, and so I think people need to, there's a lot of opportunity for folks to find a fund that they think would support the community they would like to offer their help.
Brock, thank you so much for this work and for talking with us on Free Speech TV. Is there anything else you want to tell us or tell our viewers about what they can do? And
thank you for Free Speech TV, because we know that our speech isn't free; it's expensive, and we need to, you know,
thanks a lot.
bring voice. And so, thank you all for bringing your voice. Thank you, people.
Thank you.